What is the current state of a liberal arts education in university? I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Education has been a pretty hot topic issue across all of Canada, but now we're going to focus in on a particular study at the university level. CBC writes that the president of UBC, that is the University of British Columbia, states that education without liberal arts is a threat to humanity. Now, it might sound kind of dramatic, a threat to humanity. Are we talking about someone like Thanos over here? But I must say that what he's talking about really is true, and we'll touch more on his quotes in a moment, but let's start by setting the playing field right now. Degrees in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, those things advance humanity, but the liberal arts provide a guiding force to shape the ways that progress manifests. Without things like philosophy, without things like policy and whatnot, these manifestations of technological progress would be free to do whatever they wanted because people would not have thought about the applications in the real world. Maybe sometime soon we get to the point where a brilliant STEM student figures out how to automate every single job in the world. What are the ethics of that though? How do we continue to function in a human society given this technology? The answer to that lies in the liberal arts fields, not on the STEM field. They are the doers, and the liberal arts people are, you could say, thinking about how we live given these new contexts. If we woke up one day and all of these liberal arts and humanities people disappeared, we'd be facing things like AI without ethics, automation without a plan, and that wouldn't be good for anyone. One field is the gas pedal, and the other is the brake, and I'm sure you can tell which is which. We need a balance to function properly, otherwise you end up in a situation where it's either a path that's set towards a major crash because you can't stop, or you are set in a path with no movement because all you're doing is braking nonstop, paralyzed at the thought of just philosophy, just thinking about things without actually doing much. We have to move forward, but we need some navigation. That is the partnership here. That's largely the value in liberal arts from the intellectual standpoint, to figure out the playing field, to figure out how to best traverse the realities of the world. Both fields are highly valuable, but in their own unique ways. The liberal arts, well, we'd be in danger without them, maybe a threat to humanity, as the president puts it, but the ways we have gone about shifting around the puzzle pieces in the liberal arts fields is questionable. You can make a compelling argument that the liberal arts programs have become bastardized to the detriment of us all. But we'll come back to that in a second. Back to the article first. So, the UBC president's name is Santa Ono. He argues that we have to develop a sense of the human condition, and that comes from those fields, the liberal arts. That's the job of education, philosophy, history, art, music, and to some degree, things like particular sciences. I agree with that. Now he calls it the human condition, and I call it the guiding force that navigates us through the changing times, but they are similar concepts, and we do agree these are fundamental. Then Ono goes on to claim that these types of programs are under-promoted and underfunded. And he's talking about these liberal arts programs. I would say a lot of university programs are underfunded, and I'm saying that in the sense that a lot of programs fall short of where they could be by dint of capital. If they had more money, they could get better teachers, develop a better curriculum, and make resources more accessible to the student base. I don't know about that second part though, about being under-promoted, especially in the liberal arts realm. Here's where we draw our first disagreement. These degrees are already oversaturated. Ono doesn't seem to understand that. Enrollment is dropping because of the correlation of job prospects. There is a limited amount of positions that art majors have access to, that people with a degree in history have. They can still get jobs, but the quantity is in question. And what kind of jobs are they? Even within this bucket of liberal arts, there is a wide variance. Somebody getting a degree in poli-sci or public policy versus a degree in something like gender studies are going to have widely differing opportunities post-graduation. It's just a fact that Canada has labor shortages in some areas and an abundance of people in others. It's not balanced, and you going into a field you like is not synonymous with having a good employment prospect after graduation. STEM, big data, and fields like that are where the demand is right now. It's actually to the point where Canada has to import talent because we aren't producing enough domestically, and at the upper layer of that, the students who are the brightest are getting picked off, and the brain drain effect is occurring where students are being recruited by American firms, big companies who want the brightest from around the world. This is a problem in Canada right now. It really is all about balance. Too much of one thing is bad regardless of discipline because of the oversaturation effect. When there are too many graduates in one place, the supply increases to the point where demand is not keeping up. Then you have a surplus, and that surplus results in students either not getting employed or working in a job that has nothing to do with their degree. According to Stats Canada, from 2012 to 2017, humanities enrollment has shrunk, behavioral science has grown a little bit, and visual arts have shrunk a little bit as well. But these trends to me are not disastrous, it's actually quite the opposite. It appears to me as a market correction of sorts. Students are changing to the demands of the economy, to the demands of the job market. Now, that's not to say that there are no jobs in liberal arts, because there are. But it's the quantity in question. When you have too many applicants fighting over a finite supply of resources, you're going to encounter problems, especially when there are other resources that are equally appealing which need people. You have to account for that. Also, the way I'm talking about university is probably going to raise a couple of questions. I believe that the aim of a post-secondary education really isn't to learn. It's not really about education per se, and that's true at least at the undergraduate level. This sounds odd because education is supposed to be the premise of post-secondary. University is supposed to exist as a means of gaining knowledge and intellectualism and all that good stuff, but fundamentally, at the pragmatic level, it's really all about becoming more attractive to future employers. Of course, you do learn as a side effect of doing that, but the primary aim for the vast majority of students is not simply to just learn. Employers in the job market don't know your capabilities as a person, so a degree is one such measure of that. I will admit it's imperfect, doesn't account for a lot of things, but that's one of the best ways we have at our disposal right now. Certain fields, the fact is, are more in demand, and liberal studies, although important in their own right, are not one of those fields for the most part. Advertising them further and drowning out the market does not seem wise to me when we already know where the holes in our economy are. So in that regard, I have to disagree with the president there. Despite that, if you are a student, mixing in some of those courses is a good idea for the most part. Even if you don't specialize in them, you can develop a more balanced perspective and diversify your knowledge beyond just what you're majoring in. Ono agrees with that, and he says that he is a better scholar because of these liberal arts courses due to the fact that they have diversified the way that he thinks, and at the same time, they made him move outside of his comfort zone. He had a specialty, and he had to move beyond that to get comfortable in the liberal arts realm. And I believe that. I think what he's saying is true, but I must point out at the same time that when Ono was probably enrolled is very different compared with now. Liberal arts is not the same. This is one way the field is letting itself down, in my opinion. Moving out of your comfort zone, as Ono states, challenging the way you think, and engaging in the war of ideas is what makes these fields great. That's how we develop our ideas, and Ono will call it better understanding the human condition, and further than that, we're really just trying to figure out how to best live our lives in a way that ensures the future generations are going to have a life to live as well. Now this is all grand and good, but unfortunately, the opposite of that is what the universities promote today. The first issue here is that universities have made it easy for you not to step outside of your comfort zone. They enable you to remain in your shell and just ascribe to things like confirmation bias. Things like trigger warnings and safe spaces restrict the very things Ono is praising, and I'm not too sure that he realizes that. The fundamental rule here is that you risk being offended whenever you engage in an intellectual dialogue because there always exists the possibility of you being wrong. That does not feel good. If you are debating with somebody and you're both taking it seriously, you're putting it on the line. Getting proved to yourself by the other person that what you once thought is incorrect and you must adapt, it's a very interesting situation because on one hand you realize that there is room for growth, but on the other, you have to acknowledge that you are wrong and that is hard for some people. That's why debate is so precious because it lets you have the best idea survive. The best idea wins, and that's only if you're being reasonable. If you want to be hard-headed and be unfaltering in your opinion, regardless of if the other person presents to you the most reasonable rationale for changing your mind, you're not doing it correctly. But if you are honestly intellectual, that is what happens in that playing field. The university fell victim to students complaining about feeling insecure and offended by certain topics, and they responded in the wrong way. The answer is not to shut down that function off, the idea of freedom of speech and debate entirely, because some people can't handle it at a mature level. There is no room for growth or expansion of ideas without moving out of your comfort zone. Taking away from that and letting people hide behind things like trigger warnings and safe spaces and whatnot is not what the university should be standing for. There are certain dogmas as well of the far left that have seeped into the educational institution that is poisoning it right now. Ono talks further about the wonders of broadening his mind and whatnot, but again, this is not really the reality anymore. Professors are telling students that they will fail their class if they cite Jordan Peterson. It's all you have to do. If you write about him, a person with an interesting set of ideas, an intellectual, and even if you disagree, as a professor, you have no grounds to be threatening a student of failure if they want to cite that work in their essay. You base the marks on the essay content itself. You would not know if it's good or not simply based on a citation. That is you, a professor, using your own personal bias to silence a discussion about something that you feel is not appropriate. At universities, you are also at risk of being canceled whenever you question things like the transgender ideology, or even if you choose to have a controversial speaker come out on behalf of your club. People will protest you and try to shut it down. And this idea too of a controversial speaker is funny to me because sometimes a very rational person will be deemed extremist or controversial simply because the other party is trying to push an agenda upon you, and as a result, they want to shut things down. If you think also that intersectionality isn't the best way to operate within the world, oh no, you better keep that quiet at the university liberal arts level, because you will become a villain unworthy of the ability to speak. If you aren't ready to tear down the institutions that brought us here to where we are today, you're not thinking straight, they will say. What about these axioms sounds like free thought and honest debate in the university setting? The answer is nothing. The liberal arts are amazing things, but they've degraded due to, largely, political interference. The far left and the behaviors that they push onto people is spreading. They shut down and they protest certain ways of thinking instead of honestly engaging with them intellectually. And of course, even there is nuance. Some things are just blasphemous. Like if you're a neo-Nazi, but oftentimes it's not that extreme. There are very logical things like criticizing and questioning the trans movement, or simply talking about the Israel-Palestine situation that will get you the same type of anger and animus from these protesters and the far left radicals. Intellectual honesty, freedom of speech, and debate just aren't on their agenda. To this day, it's still unclear to me why certain stances are held in such a high regard at the university setting where they have become dogmas. Unflinching, unwavering, and any talk against them gets you deemed a heretic. This isn't logical, there's no rationale to it. Instead, they are forced onto us by dint of canceling and outrage culture. Now, I must point out too, that what Ono seems to be referring to is the idea of classical liberalism, and that's something I'd actually associate myself with. These are the foundations of the liberal arts and what they should be, but things have been changing over the years. The idea of classical liberalism fixates on freedom. Freedom of speech, economic freedom, progress, individual rights. Liberalism of today, though, doesn't have all of those in common anymore. The goalposts have shifted to the extremes. Due to that shift, now I'd regard myself more as a centrist, which demonstrates the shifting of these core tenets now. The poles have moved. Liberalism of today is not the same as it once was. The foundations of it are crumbling, due to, largely, I would say, the far left radicals who are attempting to hijack the movement. They want to make it their own and present to you a vision of society where their ideas are truly what being a moderate liberal is. It's not true. Now, oddly enough, the UBC president needs to make a campaign maybe about making the liberal arts programs great again. I think that would work. You have to enforce, first of all, True diversity of thought and not just the buzzword of it. Not just using the prototypical notion of diversity, but actually administering it. When people have different ideas, what do? Do you cancel them? Do you shut them down? Or do you promote that? That's how you get the best ideas. And even if someone comes to you with a foolish notion, it helps you and it helps them too by fighting it out in the war of ideas. When you cancel somebody, you don't show them another path forward. You simply let them manifest and fester in a rage as well. The second thing that has to be done is you have to enable people to freely debate without political ideology and repercussions for saying the wrong things, because otherwise you never come to the full realization as to what is true and what's not. You have to be willing to offend each other to arrive at the truth. It's a short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. I'm not too sure many people understand this, but conversation really is the only thing we have at our disposal. Aside from violence, you have two ways of sorting out issues in this world. You converse about it, and you try to let reason rise to the surface, and if that's not available, you have to use violence. That is it. The two ways of handling problems, and I am not for violence at all. Conversation, reasonable discussion, freedom of speech and dialogue, that is the way to go, and those tenets have to be upheld because you risk bringing about chaos otherwise. Also, my next recommendation is do away with these bastardization trends that are working towards the detriment of us all. Letting the far left hijack the institution itself is a terrible precedent. Right now, it feels like university is becoming a means of indoctrination instead of a field we can truly discover, where ideas are available to us and we pick and choose the best ones versus simply being told what to believe as a dogma, when things like critical thinking, truth, and believing in science can get you canceled, you know it's a flawed system. With the massive changes coming down the pipeline, courtesy of our STEM friends, this is going to be a vital time, and we're going to be largely finding success through changes in the liberal arts field or failure because we failed to adapt. When the time comes and we are debating things like the ethics of a artificially created conscience, I want our best and brightest at the table, not people indoctrinated by ideology and who cannot think for themselves. The liberal arts are an amazing field, but the way things are going right now, I feel like people like Ono are now recognizing the path that's being laid out, and they're not, as a result, seeing where things have to be corrected. This is not simply just about the university realm itself, but that is the last safeguard we have to prevent a catastrophic effect taking hold of the world. We need to be able to freely think and debate, at least in the university setting, where ideas are supposed to reign king, not indoctrination and some type of ideology. You must shatter this effect, or people like Ono, who think it's still the best thing since sliced bread, are going to lead us astray. So, this now brings me to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoy the content, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram @PerryPlatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.